Retirement planning was never going to be easy for Gen X. We're the first generation without reliable pensions. We've carried record debts, and we're squeezed currently, helping our parents and our adult kids. But the biggest obstacle, a lot of times, it's the mistakes we make ourselves. The ones that quietly drain our savings or keep us from ever building enough. So today, I'm laying out 15 of the biggest mistakes that Gen X makes when saving and planning for our retirement. And if you recognize yourself in some of these, it's okay. Many of us, we're figuring it out as we go. We're the true pioneers of the do-it-yourself retirement plan. So let's find out where we have more work to do. Mistake number one is relying on home equity as a retirement plan. Maybe your parents or your grandparents, they could get away with this. They paid off the house, lived off Social Security, and that was enough. But today, not even close. And downsizing, it isn't the cash windfall that it used to be. And you just can't pull out, $5,000 when you need it, the way you can from an investment account. You'd have to refinance, sell it, or go into debt. And plus, even if the mortgage is done, the cost of ownership doesn't stop there. Property taxes, insurance, they keep rising. Maintenance, repairs, they keep coming. So here's the rule. Treat home equity as a bonus, not your main retirement plan. Okay, mistake number two is starting too late. The median Gen X household has only saved $40,000 for their retirement. And about 40% of Gen Xers have zero savings. And that sounds bleak. But starting late doesn't mean you're out of time. You've lost years of growth and compounding, but the only way this mistake becomes permanent is if you never start at all. And even if you're beginning from zero, it's not hopeless. Brick by brick, deposit by deposit, you can still build. And simple math and time will take care of the rest. Okay, mistake number three is carrying high interest debt. We're the credit card babies. We were handed our first card straight out of high school. And debt has followed us through cars, college, homes, healthcare. The cycle can be hard to break. But think about it. Every dollar that you spend in interest is money stolen from your future. When I had a lot of credit card debt, I forced myself to look at how much interest I had paid the month before on every statement. I looked at it every time. And that had an impact on me. And I wasn't going to allow myself to ignore it because it made me want to pay that balance off even quicker. At this age, the goal should be borrowing less, not upgrading more. The house, it's big enough. And even the most basic of cars are technological wonders today. Paying down high interest debt may be the single best investment you can make. Mistake number four, and this one, it's just not cool. It's not maxing out the 401k match. If your company offers a 401k match, that's part of your compensation package. And if you don't take it, then you're throwing away free money. Let's take this example. Your employer matches 50% of up to 6% of your salary that you put in your 401k. On a $70,000 year salary, that's $2,100 every single year that you're not getting. Stop making your company richer at your own expense. And mistake number 5 is raiding your retirement accounts early. Gen X, we've been through a lot. Job losses, helping our kids through college, needing cash for a house, and that retirement account sitting there looks awfully tempting. But if you cash out, you'll owe all of those taxes all at once. And the IRS is going to penalize you 10% more as well. In a loan against your 401k, yeah, that avoids that penalty, but it puts you in recovery mode, not building mode, for as long as it takes you to pay that back. Either way, it costs money and time. 2 valuable things that Gen X cannot afford to waste right now. Treat those accounts as untouchable. Mistake number 6 is overloading on tax-deferred accounts. When we started working, tax-deferred was all we had. 401ks and traditional IRAs. And over the years, things have been added. And today, you can choose from Roth 401ks, Roth IRAs, HSAs. And here's the issue. Every dollar that is in your 401k is fully taxable when you withdraw it. Let's say in retirement, you need a new car. You want to pay cash for it. You take all that money out of the 401k, you've got a huge tax bill in that year. But, if you have some other types of accounts to strategize with, maybe you have some money in a Roth, maybe you'll use all of that, or maybe you'll blend it, a little bit from this one, a little from that. It's called strategizing your tax burden in retirement. And think of it as, tax diversification. And mistake number 7 is ignoring healthcare costs. Fidelity puts out a report every year. They report that a 65-year-old couple today will spend $315,000 over the course of a 30-year retirement on healthcare expenses. Does your retirement account balance account for that? In Medicare, of course, covers a lot, but it doesn't cover everything. You'll still need supplemental insurance or prescription drug coverage, maybe dental insurance or maybe vision coverage, maybe even long-term care insurance. So yes, we need to plan for those costs financially and include those in our big number. But here's the smartest move. Start protecting your health today. Any lifestyle or diet changes that you can make today to protect your health, that's one of the best retirement investments you can ever make. And mistake number 8 is depending too much on Social Security. Our parents could rely on Social Security to cover a lot of their expenses. We can't do that. The checks just aren't big enough, and there are cuts that are being threatened. So here's a reality check. Go online, go to socialsecurity.gov, look and see what your benefit is estimated to be if you were to claim at age 62. Then ask yourself, could you live on that amount today? If the answer is no, and for most it will be, then you'll know that this is a mistake that you can no longer live with. And mistake number 9 is no clear retirement plan. Some people think just save as much as possible and I'll be fine. But you can't just build this massive nest egg and, do nothing with it, or plan on how you're going to spend it or plan on how you're going to live on it and protect it over the course of, a 30-year retirement. And even if you've got $2 or $3 million, poor money management could burn through that in a decade. Others, they just set their savings on autopilot and, fingers crossed, it'll all work out, it'll be enough. And that method, that might work for Gen Z. But for Gen X, a set it and forget it plan, that's expired for us. We need a real plan, a real number to work toward. And it doesn't have to be exact. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be foolproof. It doesn't even have to be $1 million. But whatever it is, it should be attainable and challenge you at the same time. And mistake number 10 is falling for lifestyle creep. The bigger house, the nicer car, the soft life. And hey, if you've already got retirement covered, then go for it. But if you don't, every dollar of lifestyle creep is just living for today with no thought for tomorrow. And as for me, I've told myself, no soft life yet. No letting up yet. Not until I achieve my savings goals. And mistake number 11 is helping your adult kids too much. If you're supporting your adult kids at the expense of your own retirement savings, then you're setting up a future role reversal. Because in a few years, you may need them to support you when you can no longer work. It might be worth having that conversation with your kids now, just to prepare them for it. And mistake number 12 is ignoring inflation. Inflation eats money alive. In 1985, $100,000 had the buying power of almost $302,000 today. Flip it forward and $100,000 today will only buy $43,000 worth in the year 2055, which is 30 years from now. And that's just at an average of 2.8% inflation. So ask yourself, the bulk of your money, wherever it might be, can it earn an average of at least 3%? If not, you're losing ground every day. And mistake number 13 is not protecting your assets. We spend decades building our lives, both literally and figuratively. And by the time you hit your 50s, you might actually start seeing your assets outpace your liabilities. But here's the thing, the more you have, the more you need to protect. If people in your life rely on you financially, then you need life insurance. If you own a home or a car, minimum liability coverage, that's not enough. One accident, one lawsuit, it could wipe out everything. I personally raised my liability coverage limits to exceed, my net worth, and it really wasn't that expensive at all. So I recommend everyone looking at your current coverage and making sure that the limits do exceed your net worth. You may even have to get an umbrella policy to do that. Just look into it. And mistake number 14 is procrastination and denial. Here's one of the biggest traps of all, putting it off. We tell ourselves, I'll get serious about retirement next year. After the kids are through college or after the mortgage is smaller. But let's be real. There's always going to be another reason. And every year that we wait, the path gets steeper. And denial, that's even worse. Pretending it'll just all work out, that makes the problem even worse. So ask yourself, what are you waiting for? If not now, when? You don't need the perfect plan to start. Just even small steps, that's better than standing still. Because the longer you wait, the fewer options that you'll have. And the more urgent and stressful retirement becomes. And mistake number 15 is being too conservative with your investments. Saving in a bank account, that's not going to cut it. Even at 4% interest, you're losing ground after taxes and inflation. And those rates are already dropping as I speak. We need growth, and that means stocks. And sure, keep some of it in safe places, but we have to maximize in a shorter amount of time. So we need to be in the market to do that. So here's the reality. Most of us, we can't afford to keep making these mistakes. Retirement is coming whether we're ready or not. And we can't change the past, but we can absolutely change the future. Every smart choice that you make today, whether it's paying down debt, diversifying taxes, capturing that full 401k match, protecting your health, all of that puts money back in your pocket and guarantees you a better future. Gen X, we've had to figure out retirement on our own, but that doesn't mean we're at a total disadvantage. We can win too, because we have Gen X superpowers. Our self-starter mindset, our fierce independence, our adaptability. We've always found a way. And if you're over 50 and you have nothing saved for retirement, check out this video that I've linked right here. I share advice on how to break through those roadblocks that are holding you back. And if you found today's video helpful, please hit the thumbs up button. I appreciate you watching. I hope you have a great week. I'll see you soon. Bye.